So the Bureau is an all-volunteer independent queer bookstore downstairs in room 210. Our regular hours are Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we often stay open later for events, of which we have many. So if you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room with Jeffrey Archer, our volunteer, who is selling books. And you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. You can also sign up on our website for those of you watching online at BGSQD. Now what's happening? Okay. So before we begin, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement and call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and then I will introduce our speakers. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide, recognize the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. Well, I don't know what's going on. It's coming and going. Okay, it is? I thought it was going out. Ooh. We also want to recognize that today, September 22nd, is the 352nd day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you will join us in calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire, the release of all detainees held by Israel, the release of all hostages held by Hamas, an end to the siege of Gaza, and an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories in order to stop the collective punishment of the Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of desperately needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Our greater hope is for peace, justice, and liberation from oppression for all people everywhere. So with that, I will be reading Arnie's bio and then Bill's and Larry's. Arnie Kantrowitz, 1940 to 2022, leaves behind a legacy as a true pioneer, sage, and champion of the gay rights movement. He is the author of the gay classic Under the Rainbow, Growing Up Gay, of a monograph, Walt Whitman, and was a notable writer and figure in gay and mainstream media. He became vice president of Gay Activists Alliance in 1970 and was a founding member of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation in 1985. He introduced one of the earliest gay studies courses and in 1999 became chair of the English department at the College of Staten Island CUNY, where he was a long-standing and beloved professor of English. He is survived by Larry Mass, his life partner of 40 years. Bill Goldstein reviews books and interviews authors for NBC's Weekend Today in New York. He is writing a biography of Larry Kramer to be published by Crown. His books, The World Broke in Two, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, D.H. Lawrence, E.M. Forster, and The Year That Changed Literature, was published in 2017. And last but not least, Lawrence D. Mass is a co-founder of Gay Men's Health Crisis and was the first to write about AIDS in the press. In 2019, he was awarded GMHC's Founders Activism Award. He is the author of Homosexuality and Sexuality, Dialogues of the Sexual Revolution, Volume 1, and Homosexuality as Behavior and Identity, Dialogues of the Sexual Revolution, Volume 2. He is the author, editor of an anthology, We Must Love One Another or Die, The Life and Legacies of Larry Kramer. He is the author of a memoir, Confessions of a Jewish Wagnerite, Being Gay and Jewish in America. Of the sequel to that memoir, On the Future of Wagnerism, Art, Intoxication, Addiction, Codependence and Recovery, and the forthcoming Wayfaring with Ned Rorem, a nonfiction novella. They form a trilogy Mass has designated as his Jewish Wagnerism series. Mass has written widely on medicine, health, and culture for mainstream and specialist publications. A recently retired physician specializing in addiction medicine, Mass resides in New York City and South Florida. And at long last, I give you Larry Mass.
I feel like Bill Maher. I want to say that's our time. So, so good. Nice to see you all. Can you hear me? Can people hear me? Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you very much. Greg and I go way back. We've done a number of events here at the bookstore over the years. The last one also with Bill Goldstein. Respectfully, let me say up front regarding the Middle East that what? Oh, is it echoing or something? Regarding the Middle East, that Arnie and I shared heartfelt concern for all civilian casualties alongside hopes for a peaceful two-state solution. Though we believed in Israel's right to defend itself, we deplored the occupation and settler violence. But justifying and condoning genocidal extremism, whether anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or any other, are not perspectives we were ever able to be on board with. Though we queers, Jews, and mixtures of us may have differing perspectives on what I still call the Hamas-Israel war, what seems certain is that we will all end up back together again in the same concentration camps we found ourselves in under the Nazis. And swiftly, if the current global stampede to autocracy, mass detentions, and deportations keeps gaining momentum. Ivana Trump was the first to publicly connect Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler, noting in her divorce proceedings for her allegations of rape by her husband that he kept a book of Hitler's speeches on his night table. It's an allegation Trump himself has verified, saying it was a gift from a Jewish friend. Ivana is said to have died accidentally from a fall in her apartment in 2022. But it's Arnie Kantrowitz who was the first person in my circles to mention the H word in relation to Trump. Hitlerian is the word we use subsequently and continuously to describe what we were witnessing as daily the increasingly intoxicated and virulent ranting, raving, lies, disinformation, climate and science denialism, conspiracy theories, blaming, denigrating, hate and fear-mongering, threatening, rabble-rousing, and incitements to violence kept worsening, leading up to the January 6th insurrection, all of which is now, yet again, full speed ahead on vilifying immigrants and blacks. I had a little insert after that first paragraph about the Middle East, and the insert said, in the last week, I must have rewritten that paragraph 100 times trying to keep pace with the literally skyrocketing news. Okay, back to the narrative, which itself jumps all over the place anyway. So, anyway, now it's J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate and avatar, who has described Trump as America's Hitler. Clearly, this comparison isn't going away, nor is the very real and dire threat it represents. Hello, I'm Larry Mass. In case you didn't figure that out, I'm the surviving life partner of Arnie Kantrowitz, who passed away 2 years ago at 81. We were together nearly 40 years. Arnie is the author of the gay classic memoir, Under the Rainbow, Growing Up Gay, and the novel we're celebrating today, Song of Myself, which is being posthumously published. Arnie is also the author of the biography of Walt Whitman that was part of the Chelsea House series on notable gay and lesbian lives. In the wake of vehement pushback from reactionary morality custodians, this series was discontinued, foretelling of what's going on in Florida and elsewhere today. So don't look for Arnie's wonderful books in classrooms and libraries in these states anytime soon. I want to thank all of you for being here. Arnie was a shining light of gay liberation. There are many people here who knew, loved, and cherish Arnie. Students, colleagues, family, friends. Let me take a moment to express special thanks to several individuals. First and again, thank you, Greg, BGSQD, and the Center for hosting us. Thanks to Brian Schwartz, the book's publication coordinator, to Tatiana Fernandez, the book's cover designer, and to our publicist, Michelle Carlsberg. I'm grateful, as Arnie himself was, to literary eminence Bill Goldstein. Bill is a long-standing champion of Arnie and his novel, very bravely so and singularly so. Hopefully he will update us on his current project, the eagerly awaited authorized biography of Larry Kramer. And I am most grateful to Patrick Merle. Patrick Merle is the editor of the New York Native, the fabled gay newspaper where so many LGBTQ plus writers cut our literary activists' teeth. Patrick's wisdom, skills, and love for Arnie and gay literature were indispensable to today's premier publication event. I'd like to ask Patrick to stand. Can we please give Patrick a standing ovation for all that he's done over decades? Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Okay. In the 1980s and 1990s, the decade plus during which Arnie's book was composed, gay liberation was in its heyday. This was thanks largely to early Stonewall era heroes like Arnie, who assumed leadership roles in publicly confronting anti-gay prejudice. Arnie's novel fictionally recreates the ignorance, meanness, and brutal oppression of those decades from World War II through the McCarthy era and on to the early period of AIDS. Daniel Del Blake, who is unmistakably Arnie Kantrowitz's voice and character, is so abused and neglected by his homophobic route of a father in a small town, upstate New York, America, that he volunteers for military service. After putting his life on the line for his country, enduring years of abuse and torture as a prisoner of war in the South Pacific, he is routed for being homosexual. Subsequently, his not being honorably discharged prevents him from getting a veteran subsidized education and keeps him from obtaining legitimate employment for the rest of his life. What? Microphone. Oh, okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. Thank you, Dan. And that's just at the outset of this gay man's odyssey of self-discovery in the America Donald Trump wants to make great again with a return to the heyday of McCarthyism. As bad as these dark ages were, Arnie, the eternally cockeyed optimist, was motivated by an irrepressible childlike belief in himself and humanity. In this, he was not unlike Anne Frank, whose diary he cherished. With Arnie, it was easier to be hopeful that the worst of this history of horrors might finally be passing. Never again, we kept saying and trying to believe, even as never again kept happening again and again. And always with the same scapegoats: women, racial, ethnic, religious, and sexual minorities, the indigent and handicapped, and yet again, immigrants. By the way, if I were Dr. Freud, what I'd say about Trump's obsession with immigrants eating pets is that what it's really all about is his own sexual fantasies of, well, and I say this in quotes, eating pussy. Donald Trump has eating pussy on the brain. Okay. Is that what was on his mind as the so-called cat lady, as J.D. Vance calls her, kept dominating him in their debate? No? Okay. And by the way, did she freaking clobber him or what? Okay. In the arts, Arnie's closest friend, Vito Russo, was making waves with the Celluloid Closet, his landmark study and traveling roadshow of homosexuality and film. A lot less successful was my own mission to get the worlds of music and opera to deal more forthrightly with gayness and homophobia, as well as with Jewishness and anti-Semitism. Arnie's quest to open the closets of gay literature, and especially that of his beloved spiritual mentor and muse, Walt Whitman, turned out to be comparably fraught. Though we were making progress, it always seemed to stop short of being trustworthy. Tolerance, we were learning the hard way, is not the same as acceptance. A recent experience with a gay friend in the media was revealing. He was so disheartened by how far back the New York Times appeared to be stepping from its affirmation of transgender rights and care that he canceled his Times subscription. Despite its overall progress in affirming gay life and culture, the New York Times now appears to be likewise stepping back from affirming that America's and democracy's standard-bearing poet, Walt Whitman, was gay. It's a disturbing development, even if one accepts that the term gay wasn't one Whitman himself or his contemporaries used. Meanwhile, we're now at that same point of book bannings in Florida and southern states that demarcated the onslaught of Nazism in Germany. Moms for Liberty, in league with anti-woke Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, have even managed to ban The Diary of Anne Frank and To Kill a Mockingbird. Remember Banned in Boston? How about banned in allied white Christian nationalist America, Russia, and Europe? How about that? Well, some version of that is where we seem to be headed and at breakneck speed. In the wake of such extremism, what we're witnessing in the mainstream media with regard to LGBTQ plus culture is a more passive and subtle retrenchment. A growing tight-lippedness, not only about the sexuality of Whitman, but other gay artists in the same pantheon of greatness, Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Tchaikovsky. From transgender healthcare to questions about the sexuality of Whitman and his beloved President Abraham Lincoln, open-mindedness is once again on the run. In the case of Whitman, this drift seems to have taken its cues from the de-gaying of Whitman by the Walt Whitman Birthplace and Museum in Huntington, Long Island. There you won't find any mention of Arnie's book on Whitman or of any scholarly contributions by gay writers such as Mark Doty, Gary Schmidt-Gall, or Jonathan Ned Katz. All of which came to a head with a gay activist zap led by Arnie at the Birthplace rededication in 1997. It was Arnie's last brave public act on the front lines of gay liberation. Just as the words gay, queer, and homosexual are nowhere to be found in the Whitman Birthplace Museum, so has any coverage of this controversy been absent in the New York Times and mainstream media. All of which has had the effect of placing Arnie's novel in today's greater context of ever-worsening minority relegation and intolerance. Instead of being primarily a chronicle of historical oppression of how it was to be gay in earlier times, Arnie's Song of Myself now seems a more cautionary foretelling of how the times are again darkening for all. The past Arnie captures in his novel now reads more and more like our present and future. If Daniel Del Blake, the protagonist of Song of Myself, was naive about how stacked the odds were against him in seeking to become himself, he now seems likewise unaware of how predictable and ferocious reactionary backlash tends to be. But just as Whitman, however bludgeoned his spirit by the Holocaust of the American Civil War, never lost his belief in humanity, the same is true of Arnie Kantrowitz. Even in the face of the Holocaust of World War II, he so unflinchingly studied and mourned, and that of AIDS, in which he lost our closest extended family members, Vito Russo, and New York City civil rights pioneer Jim Owls, and countless other friends and community. In the novel, Daniel is a budding poet whose spiritual muse is Walt Whitman. Having been given a gift that would guide and inspire him for the rest of his life by his lesbian school teacher, Whitman's Reeds of Grass, Daniel writes poems inspired by Whitman that chart Daniel's coming of age, and with that, the coming of age of gay liberation, democracy, and America. Just as Arnie Kantrowitz wasn't going to go down with the mean-spiritedness of an ignorant, bullying, disinformation program world, Today's deplorable Project 2025 is not going to go up without a fight. Not even if, as with the American Civil War, the Holocaust, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Gay Liberation Movement, the costs turn out to be as high as the stakes. Nope, never again. With the spirits of great heroes like Walt Whitman and Arnie Kantrowitz to guide us, and like people in recovery, we belong to the No Matter What Club. Like the crabgrass Daniel evokes in the prologue to Song of Myself, we keep coming back no matter what. No matter what! All of which is to give some sense of the currents of Arnie's novel, a body of experience and sensibility electrified by Arnie's legendary spirit of wicked humor, loving kindness, sagacity, and courage. Picaresque and bawdy, Song of Myself is a saga filled with adventure, sensuality, humanity, and resilience. At its heart, as he was so deeply in Arnie's soul, was the great gay poet of America, democracy, and sexual liberation, Walt Whitman. In seeking to tell the story of Whitman's life as a gay man's odyssey of self-discovery, Arnie Kantrowitz ends up telling his own story and ours. To conclude, I'm going to read 3 very short things, I promise they're short, passages. These are all by Daniel Del Blake, the protagonist of Song of Myself. This is actually the second paragraph of the prologue, the opening to the novel. The life I was originally expected to lead was a dull one, confined to the small town of Elysium, New York, where I was born. But somehow my years have been spread all along the American continent, along with an ill-fated sojourn in a hell of a paradise known as the South Pacific. And I've managed to have more than my share of exotic adventures. Without even trying, I have been an outrage to my family, my church, and my nation, but never to myself or those I love. To society, I'm some kind of alien weed growing in the wrong soil. But to my mind, I'm the natural vegetation of the American landscape, not the landscaped, evenly manicured kind of grass that's found in overly cultivated yards, but a wilder sort of crabgrass that defies the best efforts of the gardeners to eradicate it because it's sturdy and can take root anywhere. And these are 2 poems, very short poems, among many that throughout the book that inspired by Walt Whitman and that are about Walt Whitman, but that are written again by this protagonist, Daniel Del Blake. Walt Whitman in World War II. Walt Whitman shook like a leaf in World War II. The terror alone enthralled him, taught him the enormity of fear, the world exploding all around and no sure place to set a foot, the necessity of murder and the necessity of forgiving. He dressed himself in khaki and rode in a Sherman tank. He made adequate lists of atrocities. He loved to fancy himself a Jew in Auschwitz, which caused him great mystic pain and ecstasy. He imagined he would never survive the war and the bitterness that was its fruit. It strained his faith to think that the heights of goodness and joy could equal these depths of terror and sorrow. He did survive. He changed, of course, but he survived. He crops up everywhere, like welcome weeds. He reminds us to love war. It is a chance to strive. Style is the only matter in times like these when the spirit quivers and applauds the wisdom of all struggle. The Holocaust was a university of horror and hate, and Walt Whitman loved its lessons. World War II was just fine with him, and so was every other destruction that followed it, one after another, down to the last dead toad, in which he discovered quintillions of joys. Looking for Walt Whitman at the baths. Where did you come from, Walt Whitman, old drifter, old dreamer, old master, old mentor? Where are you from? Where but inside me, musing and pregnant, summoned out of the dark and the silence, huddled in corners of motherless minds, tingling with wonder, with warmth, and with wisdom, and sorrowfully thinking your innocence lied. And where are you now, Walt Whitman, old father, old child, old brother, old comrade, where are you now? Where? But inside me, singing your love songs, tinkling and vague like wind chimes on water. Where could you be but in paradise buried, here in 1,000 bedrooms a day, where men entice and comfort men, encouraging, touching men with words, with caring, with fingers, with licking and sucking and fucking, and finally, fountains of sperm. And where will you be, Walt Whitman, old husband, old lover, old prophet, old poet? Where will you be when the sun hangs dead at last in the sky? Where? But inside me, smiling sagely, certain like childhood, like limitless fancy, like music remembered, like lust at sunrise, where will you be?
I don't. Oh, yes, it's on. Unless you plan to remain silent, leave it on. Well, thank you, Larry, for all of that, and also for inviting me to do this, as you hinted in your opening remarks. I first read this book. I hate to admit to doing anything this long ago as an adult, but I think I first read it 35 years ago. I was first an editor at a publishing company. Is this working? Wait. Oh, okay.
You got to put it right up, right?
Just like Walt Whitman would like me to. So I first read it when it was submitted to me as an editor. Unfortunately, was unable to publish it. But as I was reading it again, so much of what you say in your remarks holds true in reading the book, that it's still distressingly current in its anger, its disappointment, its hurt. And when do you think that, yes, I must resurrect this and publish this after Ernie's death? Was that something you immediately knew, or was it something that you wanted in particular to sharpen his legacy?
I think I was continuously aware of that. I was aware, of every aspect of his involvement in the novel, over many years, and knew how deep and dear it was to him. And, for all of Arnie's success in his life and career, and he was very, very loved. People, he really had some very heartbreaking developments, and the failure of the book to, catch fire on the first go around with publishers. And I hope this isn't embarrassing you, but Arnie had a leading literary agent, and if the book was sent around to a number of major publishers, something like 30, and the only champion among all these people who really championed the book and who really wanted to go forward with it at that time was Bill. You're not the publisher, but you were an editor with one of the publishers. This is the kind of things that we had gone through this heyday of coming out novels and historical novels. We're still at just the tip of the iceberg in terms of uncovering gay history, but somehow the AIDS epidemic was there, and although it's a really terrific chapter, penultimate chapter in the book on AIDS and what we all went through. But as happens a lot with, Bill can talk about this, with editors and publishers, the timing just wasn't quite right. And, Arnie didn't have the heart after this first go around to keep trying to, find a home for it. He just was no matter what I said or did or anybody else, he just put it away and wouldn't revisit it. it reminded me of, after we spread Vito's ashes on Fire Island, Arnie would never go back. I mean, his heart he was so crushed by his loss of Vito, and it's just he made decisions like this. He wasn't personally ambitious or self-important, and if the public didn't like something, or if he wasn't really being embraced in whatever, but he was really okay with just putting it aside and not pushing for himself. He didn't push his own stuff.
Was there ever a time when, before he moved on to writing this novel, that he thought he might write another memoir, a sequel to Under the Rainbow? I mean, I guess that seems so obvious a move. I mean, in one way, but he switched from memoir to fiction.
Vito used to say in commiseration about writing with Arnie, said, because Arnie found it very difficult to get down to writing, and Vito said, you have to beat yourself up to get to the typewriter. You have to beat yourself up. And Arnie was one of those people. He was a wonderful writer, and he got a lot of feedback, and but it was very personal and difficult for him. And despite, what would seem a real, career as a writer, he was just, he wasn't, like I say, he wasn't that ambitious. And, Arnie had a secret as a writer that he really couldn't share with anyone, which is that he was a poet. Arnie was a poet. Now, he did have a few poems published, but he left, even more astonishing than this manuscript, he left a whole manuscript of his poems. And no one knew how deep, you could sort of intuit, well, of course, he's got to have been a serious poet or poetry person if he was so involved with Walt Whitman. But he actually himself was involved in poetry at a very in-depth level, one that, he just didn't really feel he could share with that many people. So I'm an opera person. I know opera and I know opera speak. And so when I meet opera people, I can talk to them, about opera. Arnie was a poetry person. If you're not an opera person, a real opera person, I'll sort of pick you out very quickly. And Arnie was that way with poetry. I was not someone he could really, as much as I loved him and as much as I admired all that he did, I was not a fellow poetry person that he could talk to in real depth about his experience and commitment to being a poet and poetry. And so he basically, just the way he never went back to the novel and tried to get it published, I didn't even know this manuscript of poems existed. I discovered it in his papers. So nobody would know about it. We're calling it Burnt Edges for now. But anyway, that's so.
What is the meaning of Burnt Edges?
I was afraid you would ask that. We had a little fire in the kitchen, and the edge of the manuscript, the little edge, got kind of charred. So when you went to copy the papers, there only this little burnt edge that comes out. So it's called burnt edges. Anyway.
Well, so one of the things that you say in your introduction to the book is that bringing Walt Whitman out of the closet was Arnie's lifelong cause as teacher and activist, his quest. And I think, given what you've just said about Arnie as a writer and his lack, as you put it, of personal ambition, it's interesting that the words are teacher and activist. And if you could say something about how Arnie saw those roles, not only about Walt Whitman interconnected, but how he saw his life as a professor and his life as an activist as related, and then connecting to a younger generation, or many younger generations.
Thank you. Well, Arnie was widely beloved. He was admired, he was respected, he was a great teacher. He used to come home at the end of every semester with handfuls of testimonials from his students. Any one of these would have justified an entire career. He had tons of those things. Of course, I'm partial and biased. I may be overstating things a little bit, but not by much. Marianne Fail, his good friend and colleague at the college, was, can testify to that. Arnie was very, very well liked as a teacher. He was very serious about being a teacher. He pioneered gay studies scores, but many students were not gay, and he would get all these letters of thanks and gratitude from many who were not gay. Arnie was as Jim said, put it so well, he was a sentimental softy. Underneath that sort of gritty exterior was a heart of pure schmaltz. Is that the way you put it? His couple of his favorite movies were, he loved those old 1940s movies with Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and Mrs. Miniver, and what's the other big teacher movie? But anyway,
Tea and Sympathy.
Tea and Sympathy, yes. So, no, he took his teaching very seriously. He had a lot to show for that. And he was very committed to the whole business of, education. And, this book, it's a little, the thread of the narrative is that he decides that he wants to write a book, a biography of Walt Whitman. And so he keeps constantly trying to write the actual life story of Walt Whitman, and realizes he can't quite do that because he doesn't have all the pieces, and then he ends up instead telling his own story. But he does tell Whitman's story, and he's very committed to this voice of gay humanity that resounds everywhere, in every corner for all people. And he really felt territorial and possessive of Whitman, but it was not in any way over the top or excessive or in any way wrong. It was, he felt that we needed to be able to claim Walt Whitman as ours for reasons of pride and for reasons of our own history, and and so that became his mission. He was not saying that nobody else could appreciate Whitman, not by a long shot, but that's what happens with people of gay renown. I mean, they are appreciated, for widely for their more general contributions to culture. People like Michelangelo or Leonardo or Tchaikovsky, and the recognition that they were gay is perhaps acknowledged. I mean, there are a lot of people who will acknowledge these people were gay, but not valued, not really, given its due consideration. And that was the struggle that Arnie engaged in around Whitman.
You say that the novel is about this man who is writing or trying to write the biography of Walt Whitman, and tells the story. In the novel, the character says that he was trying to make sense of the life Walt Whitman led a century before my time, and I finally realized I had to make sense of my own first. So I'm interested in the fact that Daniel Del Blake, and if you can comment if there's anything to say about the name and if that has any message for Arnie in it. But also, Arnie, in the voice of Daniel Del Blake, is born about 20 years before or more, before Arnie,
Yeah.
so that he, I guess, can witness the history of gay life and American life that Arnie missed in childhood, adolescence, etc. So there's a lot that is Arnie in that, and then there's also a lot of Arnie as an observer of American history.
Yes.
In the novel.
Yeah, it's a wonderful chronicle of life, not just gay life, but American life, and how it was, how people lived, and how we were as gay people. I mean, he did that to a real degree in Under the Rainbow, but he does it again, and it's filled with all kinds of wonderful details. This chapter, the sort of penultimate chapter that takes place back in New York, he's been to San Francisco, he's been all over the country, and he AIDS is unfolding, and he re-experiences the landmarks of the gay liberation movement, the Stonewall Rebellion, and the organizing of GAA and GLF and these gay organizations that are happening, and so it's very rich in all that. He I think that the Whitman thing gets exposed in its limitations. I mean, there's the richness of Whitman and the gayness of Whitman is brought out, but there's because Whitman, like all people, virtually everyone of his ilk and era, was totally closeted. It's very difficult to know for sure some things about him and about, he had to claim being straight, and he did that, and Arnie looks at a lot of that as disingenuous, and what he kind of had to do to prevail, and someone who was ambitious still about his own career, and that became an important consideration, and how he presented himself and what he did and didn't say, and lies that he told, and stories that he made up. So it's just it's a mix. You don't. It's a narrative that can continue indefinitely with further recollections and new perspectives, looking from the future into the past. And, so I think that it's a narrative and a discussion that will continue.
You hinted at, well, first of all, is there a meaning to the name Daniel Del Blake?
Not that I remember offhand. I mean, it's a really good question. It's just a kind of, white bread American, kind of name. And
A stage name for Arnie Cantor.
yeah. Yes. I mean, Arnie identified with all people. Arnie was very Whitman-esque in terms of his love for everybody, for every people. He loved America. He loved, even the story, even America's Heart Band, which does this character so much, treats him so badly because he loved it all. I mean, he just had this incredible, irrepressible spirit of reaching out and loving and embracing and understanding and forgiving. I mean, he is, and that's who Whitman was, and that's who Arnie was.
I think using the word activist, I mean, especially left-leaning or left-wing activists, so much of the rhetoric for centuries is that they hate America. I mean, and so what you say about Arnie loving America, I think of that famous photograph of him in Sheridan Square with the police force and the policemen. I mean, if you could say a little bit about that image and Arnie's commitment to activism and street activism as an expression of loving America, even if it needs to change.
He was very committed to activism. He was appalled by any kind of discrimination. And again, he's almost a carbon copy of Whitman in this sense. He's someone who, people of the left and or the right could find lots of stuff in these lives to say that, well, Arnie was this or Arnie that. I mean, to be really clear, and honest, Arnie and I considered ourselves centrist. We were not, even though a lot of our viewpoints were left-leaning and a lot of the activism was considered leftist, we were no more comfortable on the right than on the left. And, he and I were very much in sync on all of this. We basically, in terms of most things that we endorsed or believed in or embraced, most people would say we were people of the left, but we were center left. We were not far in either direction. So.
When reading this novel, Daniel Del Blake, I presume a lot of these careers that he has or jobs that he had were not autobiographical experiences of Arnie's. He runs a brothel at one point. He works as a masseur at the Everard Baths. He's a janitor and bartender at the Mine Shaft. Which gives a very, one of the things you said earlier about seeing what gay life was like in all of these eras. I also thought it was very interesting to see how gay people had sex in all of these earlier eras, because obviously it was not only in the comfort of one's bedroom that people met.
I think that what I read into this and what kept impressing me was Arnie was this character is, like you say, he's a brothel attendant and he works as a masseur at the baths and all of that. And what I pick up in that is Arnie's extraordinary sensibility to be able to understand and have compassion for people. So what went through my mind is that all those sort of nameless people at the baths, remember when we were all at the baths and, you had masseurs and you had people working and, at the desk and all that, like, who were those people? And I think Arnie was really saying in this book, I'm these nameless gay people who are all over the place, who you don't even think about, who are kind of, they have an odd job here and an odd job there. They're people who have experienced terrible discrimination, have been rejected by their families, who have been fired from their jobs. All of this is stuff that the character undergoes in his novel. And so myself, he experiences all this. Arnie's one of these, sort of forgettable, Arnie's not one of the character in the novel does not become a gay celebrity. But what's interesting, at one point, he goes to a GAA meeting and he meets this character named Arnie Kantrowitz, who he describes as being bald and looking weird and all this other stuff, and but who seemed to be talking about the rights of prostitutes in the whole period of the business of Stonewall. Prior to that, there was this, sex workers were being, very abused and mistreated, and they had no rights, and there were some demonstrations, and then there was that whole business at the Jefferson Market, which was like a a jail.
Women's health.
The women's health. So he weaves all of that into there, and so it's all these sort of netherworld people. He gives vivid, extended descriptions of what it's like to go to the mine shaft, and and what went on there, and the whole business of leather and S&M, and I mean, it's really a tour through gay America, and but it's Arnie's voice of being loving and compassionate and understanding and forgiving, and there's just no he's not so there's no ego.
I loved that when the character meets Arnie Kantrowitz tries to get him to come back to another meeting, but the guy doesn't go.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, he does all these weird things that don't work. Like he has this friend who's loosely based on Vito. It was sort of a combination of Vito and the drag queen. It becomes his
Vito and Vita.
His best friend, but he's kind of this sort of streetwise, street smart kind of guy who goes along with Dill on all this stuff related to Whitman. He makes him visit the Whitman house in Camden and all this kind of stuff. And at one point, and he also sort of subjects him to Whitman's poetry. He reads Whitman's poetry to this friend who's this sort of street smart gay type. He goes, "Oh my God, we're not going to no more of that."
The character's named Louis Pellegrino.
Yes, Louis Pellegrino.
I did in my notes Louis Pellegrino, Vito, because also Vito did work at the St. Mark's Baths and was one of those people who checked people in. I mean, so I wondered.
I was there. I know. Vito was there, working there, and Arnie and I were both patrons. That's kind of where we met. Yeah.
You and Arnie met.
Yes, and Vito was there working as a masseur or something. Yeah.
I was going to ask you when you met if it was after or before Under the Rainbow. Did you know Arnie's work before you met him?
The Under the Rainbow was what year?
1977.
77. No, I wasn't even. I did nothing. I didn't know anything. I moved to New York in 1979, and that's when it was in the late 70s that I really started coming out and all that. No, I just met them here. I didn't. I hadn't read their books or anything. So.
Well, before we go to questions from the audience, there were two things. I mean, we've talked about, or you've said how funny Arnie would be, and I wanted to quote one line which I just thought was hilarious from a drag queen, Arnie Daniel. He's briefly a drag queen, and there's a scene with in a drag bar in San Francisco, and he comments that one of the performers looked like Joan Blondell playing her own mother. So that, I mean, on the one hand, the character says, "I didn't know what to do with all this death." That's coming later in the novel, but I just wanted to reiterate how funny Arnie actually was.
He was endlessly funny. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and it was infectious. Everybody recognized it. Everybody got it. Everybody liked it, and it just permeates this novel. It's everywhere there. Yeah.
And then the last thing before we go to questions is how prescient the book is, because the novel ends, as you'll find, with in a kind of meta way. I mean, almost the same way that the main character meets Arnie Kantrowitz. But one of the envisioned futures for this house in a small town that may or may not be something that the main character has inherited or will inherit. He has the vision that he would create a hospice for patients, for gay men dying of AIDS. And the novel was written in the 80s and early 90s. And of course, that's prefiguring of what happens in the play The Inheritance, which
Right.
doesn't come for another almost 20 or 25 years. So that vision was there in Arnie in a beautiful way.
Yes, I think his experience of losing his two closest friends, and Arnie and I were very, very devoted to each other. We really loved each other, but I don't think Arnie was ever devoted to any other people in his life more than Vito and Jim Alves. They were joined at the hip, and he lost them both through excruciating, extended bouts of AIDS. And, so this was very much in our hearts and minds. I used to massage Vito's. He had these extensive KS lesions, and I would massage his legs. And he experienced just excruciating pain, and it was very, very, and we were the gay community people who Larry Kramer was railing against for not doing more. I mean, Larry, was a great hero and really meant well, but I mean, we killed Vito, you and I are talking about that now. And, because, and we really did feel absolutely terrible that we couldn't do more and didn't do more. And, they rightly called out the whole community for not doing more and being more. But it was an outcry of pain. I mean, a lot of us were in there doing what we could. And even those of us who weren't were still doing what we could. We cared. Anyway, the whole thing, it touched us very, very deeply through. We had many, many friends who died of AIDS. We were very involved at many different levels, but I think Arnie's experience with Vito and Jim was so deeply personal. And his writing about it the way he did, and what you're just talking about now, was his way of, this is what maybe we could do, or this is a wishful thinking of what we might do maybe someday in the future. And of course, a lot of this stuff did actually come to pass, as you say. There's that house in The Inheritance, and so.
Well, I mean, it's an envisioning of a hopeful future written before protease inhibitors and before a new era for some began a few years after he stopped writing that. So it's that hopeful vision, even amid sadness.
Vito died in 1990.
1990.
In 1990, and the protease inhibitors came in 93?
95, 96.
Yeah, it was just so unfortunate that But anyway, Vito's brother and his wife, he's here today. So anyway, powerful memories of really wonderful, special, beloved people.
Well, thank you, Larry Mass. We'll go to questions, but I just want to say before we go to questions that when you talk about Arnie's writing and Vito's writing, your writing too has been essential over these last more than 40 years, and the community and we all owe you a great deal, both for what you did in the Times and also for recording the Times. And as I've said in other talks, you and Arnie also preserved your own history and correspondence and journals and drafts, and that makes it possible to write the gay history of your time and for the future. So thank you.
Could I have the first question to you?
Oh, no.
I don't want to, put you on the spot for it, but could you give us some kind of update on how your Larry Kramer project is going?
Going well, going along. I hope to finish in a year, so another year. yes. But I mean, I wish this were a panel of more than one biographer, so that others would agree with me that the work is endless. But yes, it's moving along. In fact, well, I said to Vito's sister-in-law, I was just writing something about Vito in describing what happened, how the Normal Heart comes to the public theater, which is it premieres in 1985, April of 1985. About a year before, in April of '84, Larry is trying to get the public to read the play, and a director who later died of AIDS named A.J. Antoon, who at that moment had just directed The Rink, the Broadway musical The Rink. Larry has sent it to A.J. Antoon as well as a couple of other directors, while he's also pursuing theater companies. And Gail Papp, who was the director of New Play Development and the wife of Joe Papp at the Public Theater, wrote a message to herself about the fact that she had just spoken to A.J. Antoon on the phone on April 11th, and that he's very interested in directing the play, and she writes his impressions of it. And the play itself was much longer than The Normal Heart itself. Has a lot of stuff in those early drafts that is later taken out and becomes The Destiny of Me. But in A.J. Antoon's little remarks that she writes down, because she hasn't read the play yet, she says something about Larry Kramer love story / I mean, I forget all the words. And then she says, he said, two interesting protagonists, Doctor and Ned. And so he had a very clear sense of what the heart of the play would be, although he didn't direct it. But the reason I'm saying all this about Vito is that in Vito's journals, which, because of Arnie and you, are at the New York Public Library, about a year later, the play, it's almost exactly a year later, the play has its first preview at the Public Theater. And Vito is at the first preview, and he writes, went to the preview last night. And then 2 days later, he writes in his journal about a friend of his who has gotten some bad health news. And he says, Steve's bad news and seeing The Normal Heart have depressed me. I broke down with, and then he's talking to his doctor at the time. And so just the immediate impact that this play had, and the fact that the play and Vito's life were so porous. I mean, the friend's bad news and seeing the play led to this moment of breaking down with his doctor seems very important to me. So that was probably not the answer to your question.
No.
If you pinch me, I have random details at my mind.
I'm just so fond of Bill. We've had this exchange, sometimes very intense, going on for several years now, it seems like, about Larry, who just keeps looming ever larger as this figure of our times and our, communities. And so, needless to say, this is going to be a extremely important book. So anyway, thank you for all that you're doing, Bill, and Bill is just he's this touchstone of gay writers and gay literature, and so many outstanding people here. I mean, people who have done so much and contributed so much, and it's heartening. I mean, even as sort of scary and frightening as it is sort of out there, it really does give you hope. And so, thank you.
Thank you. So, questions for Larry? Thank you.
My name is Dan Jacobson. I've known both Larry and Arnie almost since I moved to New York in 1981. But I actually knew Arnie much before that time when I was living in Los Angeles, because he was a regular contributor to The Advocate, writing occasional pieces, as did Jim Saslow, who's sitting in the front row there. So I got to know both of these men through their writing before I ever met them in person. It was quite an experience to see that they actually were real people. But I wanted to mention that I admired Arnie's writing so much. I was tickled by it. It was wonderful. He sort of walked a fine line between La Rochefoucauld and Henny Youngman. And but he was ferocious about coming out and the importance of coming out and being out and letting people know that you were out. And he just wrote some very beautiful and humorous and lovely pieces. I have a whole file of them, which I discovered when I went to cut down to the Tutankhamun level of my papers, because these are files that I've been saving for. The first piece was in 1975, so it's a good 50 years since I collected these pieces. I don't know where they're going to go when I go, but I wanted to offer them to you, Larry, in case you didn't have copies of them. Yes, I have. I brought some of them with me, but I haven't finished rereading them yet, and you're not getting them until I do.
I see several posthumous volumes. First, you'll have to do the poetry, and then the wit and wisdom of Arnie Kantrowitz.
Hey, thank you. I'm John Adrian. I was a student of Arnie's in the 90s at the College of Staten Island. He was a great blessing in my life as I was finally coming out. He helped me enormously as a mentor. I recently, about 3-4 months ago, tripped over Conde Russo for what he did back in the 70s when he was working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. No, at the Museum of Modern Art, pardon me. And the initiative he took there. That paid fruit for me when I was doing a cinema studies class about 15 years ago, and some guy who worked at the museum, the Modern Art Museum, would have you seen the same film I just saw? And he was starting to dismiss the class, and I stood up and waved at him. And wait, is this your opinion of what the film's about, or is it the opinion of film critics and people who write about film? It was his opinion. I said, well, I saw something very different. And I then proceeded to describe the relationship between the 4 guys who lived in the cabin that was neat as a pin, 2 bedrooms, 2 guys in each bedroom. Mercedes McCambridge's role. Judith Selbaum had a hard time matching her as a butch woman. And I proceeded to give him my version of what I had just seen. And about 2/3 of the way through it, I said to myself, oh shit, I'm just repeating what I read from Mr. Russo. I ran home, looked up Johnny Guitar, 1 sentence. Whoever the director was, his neurotic film. And it was like, yeah, Mr. Russo has taught me how to watch films. But watching the video about Mr. Russo, the HBO video, seeing Arnie, seeing the Arnie I knew, hearing his voice, made me realize how much I miss him. I last saw him December 5th, 21. We were emailing back and forth a day or two. That morning he said, bring food. What do you want for lunch? He told me. I brought it. We had a nice lunch, a nice visit, and that was the last. So, and thank you, Larry, so much for what you've done to get this book. Which, by the way, Arnie was not fictionalizing his life; he's fictionalizing mine. And how he found out so much about my childhood, I want to know.
Thank you so much, John. You know, I just want to say, John arranged for Arnie to be at the head of the Gay Pride Parade in Staten Island. And so Arnie and I rode in this convertible in the kind of front seat, and there weren't many bystanders, but there was one contingent that was pretty memorable. It was one of those God hates fags, religious extremists. And it was the first time in my life that I really got scared that somebody might pull out a gun or something like that and shoot us. You know, but, and I still have the sash in my living room that Arnie wore for College of Staten Island, 2008. It was this lovely thing. I don't know who put that together, John. Did you? But anyway, John has just been this incredible champion and devoted friend and, historian of Arnie. And thank you for all that you've done, John. Thank you. Thanks.
Other questions? No? Well, I mean, we've been alerted that there are very few copies of the book left today, although more will soon be available. But before we have you talk to to Larry privately, you need to go finish buying off those books, and then he'll sign them. But thank you, Larry Mass, and thank you, Arnie Kantrowitz.
Thank you so much.